Hi everyone, and welcome back to the Stitch Sessions. Today we are diving back into some more granny motifs. And of course the square is the most popular crochet motif out there, the square. And I've got one right here with a nice little white border. But another square motif that maybe doesn't get discussed enough is the mitered square. Now, I'm not sure if you can see that too clearly with this because I used variegated yarn and then plain yarn, which happens to have the same colors. But what happens is essentially is we are working from a corner and then working our square outwards towards the other corner. So if you look closely, and this was actually probably a very poor choice of yarn to show you guys, I've got the beginning of my regular granny square there, and then I started to only work on two sides for the white. And then I came back and added my variegated to the corners. Actually, this is a very terrible example because it's hard to see, but I think if I pull it back, you should be able to see. So generally, this motif is great for extolling different color changes. And usually we change every 2 rows, but it doesn't have to be. It could be every 4 rows. But there is a change in the pattern every 2nd row, and that's what creates the miter. And that is what I'm going to show you guys today, and I'm going to use a much better color combination to show you. Okay, as always, you want to make sure when you're working on a project, especially modular ones like this, that you definitely have a pair of scissors and a darning needle on hand for sewing in your ends later on. And of course, you're going to need your trusty hook. Now, I'm using my favorite hook, which is the 5mm hook, also known as an H or a size 8. And the reason why I'm using this hook is because I'm going to use up some more of my cotton scraps. So this is the Bernat Handicrafter cotton, perfect for summertime projects, all kinds of great things. It's so strong and it's so durable, and that's why I like working with it. So I've got a couple of different colors because I want to show you how the mitered square really shows off such a beautiful color change. So that's what we're going to start with now. Okay, so what I'm going to do, I'm going to start off with my pink. So I've got a hot pink here and a little bit of some yellow left over. Now, to start the mitered square, it begins exactly like a regular granny square. So we're going to create the first 2 rounds of your traditional granny square. Now, in this particular tutorial, I'm going to show you how I like to start my granny squares, and that is with a cinch circle. So in this particular example, I use the chain 4 method or chain 5, however many you use, to create my ring. And it's just as pretty, but in this instance, I use the cinch circle method. And I like to do that because I do like the look of the cinched in center. So I'm going to show you how I do that. So to begin, I'm going to start by placing the yarn and wrapping it around my 2 fingers here as if I'm going to do a slip knot. Okay, now the difference is, I'm just going to trap this in here, I'm going to insert my hook and pull the yarn through, but I'm not going to cinch this shut yet. What I'm going to do is once I've pulled it through, I will then yarn over and chain 1, and that will secure the circle's shape. So now I can take those fingers out, and that is my circle, okay? So then I just like to take that tail and bring it out to the front there. Okay, so now we can get started. So whereas some of you might use a chain ring to work out of, I'm using this circle that we're gonna cinch shut at the end. Whew, it's a mouthful. Okay, I'm now gonna proceed to chain 2 more. And why I'm doing that is because I need to create the height of a double crochet stitch. And usually we'll chain 3. And remember, we chained 1 at the start, okay? So now we want to produce our first shell, which means that we need to have 3 double crochets crocheted into this circle. Chain 3 already counts as 1, so I'm going to do 2 more. So I'll yarn over and go into the circle and pull up a loop. I'm trying to make sure that I keep my short tail out of the way here. and then I'll finish my double crochet. Now, usually, okay, I'll admit it, always, when you're using a cinch circle in the beginning, it's very floppy. So it can be a little testy to work with if you are brand new to using the cinch circle. So my recommendation is always to take your time, okay? You don't want to rush through it. So there we have 3 double crochets into our circle. Doesn't look like much yet. Now, we want to create our first corner. So that means we're going to chain 2. Now, there are many of you out there that would chain 3 in your corners, and that is amazing. I love to chain 2 because I'm not too much of a tight crocheter. If you are a tight stitcher, definitely categorically you really do need and should to chain 3, okay? I'm only chaining 2 for my corner. I then am going to produce the next side of the square by placing another shell into the center of my ring here. So as usual, I'll yarn over first to pull up a loop, and I will do 3 double crochets, and that is what's going to create that nice shell stitch that the granny square is so famous for. Okay, and there you have it. There's our first corner. Okay, and then you will chain 2, and you will repeat that again. You'll place another shell into the center of your ring. Okay, you're going to do that until you have a total of 4 shells and 4 sets of chain 2s in between. So I'm going to let you finish this ring, and then I'm going to meet back up with you once I've finished my 4th shell. Okay, so I've just finished my 4th shell. 1, 2, 3, 4, and you can see I've got a chain 2 in between all of them. Now is the time when I would take this little short tail and I'm going to pull on it, see? And I'm going to pull it really tight. Sometimes you need to do an extra slip there. And there we go, and it's been cinched shut, okay? So what I need to do now, I have 1, 2, 3 corners. So after my last shell, I need to make sure that I chain 2 for my final corner. And then I'm going to find the top of that original chain 3, 1, 2, and 3, which is right there. And I'm going to slip stitch to join. Just like that. Round 1 of our granny square is complete. Okay, so now we have 4 corners and 4 sides. So this is still typical of a regular granny square. So we're going to go on to round 2, which is also going to be the same as your typical granny square. So we do have to start with the first 2 rows of how you would do a normal granny square. Now, some of you for row 2 would chain 3 and just work right into this corner that you've got here. And then some of you would slip stitch over to this corner. That's actually what I'm going to do. This is totally a personal preference, but I just like the idea of always continuously moving in that direction. So I'm just going to now slip stitch into the very next stitch here. And this one is easy to miss. Okay, so all this is doing is helping you make your way. I'm going to slip stitch into the next one. And then you're going into the corner. So it's just kind of a sneaky little way to get to that corner. Now we can work out of the corner. So for round 2, we're now focusing on creating our corners a little bit further. So we're developing them a little bit further out. So you're going to chain 3. And then we're going to create the rest of our shell into the corner space. So remember, if you've seen any of our other granny square tutorials, that we create a corner by stitching a shell into the space, chain 2 or 3, and another shell back into the same space. So that really will establish your corners, so to speak. Okay, so now I'm going to chain 2, And I'm going to insert back into that corner space and place another shell, which means another 3 double crochets. Okay, so there you go. So now you can really see the corners much more definite in round 2. Now, we're only pretty much working corners, but in between regular shells, many people will do a chain 1 and then move on. So as your square gets a little bigger, I'll bring this guy back out. As your square gets a little bigger, so you can see these are the corners, right? And so we chain 2 in the corners, and many people will chain 1 between each shell just to help your work lay a little bit nicer and it'll sit flat. Like I always say, if you are a type crocheter, you need these spacers, okay? The chain 1s don't really count as a stitch. They're just really designed to create space and a relaxed look for your work to sit flat. I personally do not chain 1. So it's not wrong, it's not right, it is just a personal preference. So if you watch other tutorials and you see people chaining 1, some people do, some people don't, and that's quite normal. So it's important to kind of gauge what you like, what works best for you. So I tend not to chain 1, so I am not going to, okay? So just now continue on into each corner. That's all you're going to focus on for round 2. Is just placing a shell, which is 3 double crochets, chain 2, and a shell into each corner. Okay, so I've done a shell, chain 2, and I'm going to do a shell back into the corner. Okay, so do that for all 4 corners, and then I'll meet you back up at the end of round 2. Okay, so I am coming up to the end of round 2. So now you've got your center takes on that kind of X shape there, and now each corner is able to spread out and sit nicely. Each has a shell, a chain 2, and a shell. So I've just finished my last corner, which hopefully you can see there. So I did a shell, chain 2, and a shell, and now I just want to join my side here. So those of you that chain 1 in between, make sure you chain 1. I'm just going to find the top of that first chain 3, and I'm just going to insert my hook and slip stitch to join. And that would be the end of round 2. And so from here on, this is how we're going to build the mitered square. So here I would just snip off my yarn here. And then we can always, you can weave that in right away or you can weave it in later. Totally up to you. And I've got my tail there. Okay, so this is basically kind of what I would call the center point, even though it won't be the center. We're going to continue now. We're going to introduce our new color and we're going to continue to work just along 2 sides, back and forth. Okay, so we're going to introduce our yellow next. Okay, so we're going to introduce our new color. We're going to start off by placing a slip knot on our hook. And then you're going to find a corner to start working with. So I'm just going to kind of ignore this tail here. So I'm going to start in this corner here, and I'm just going to slip stitch to secure my new color. So just bring that through. I'm just going to attach it just like that. Okay, so now my new color is on there. So I'm in a corner. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to begin by chaining 3. And I'm going to finish my shell stitch. So remember, each corner has 2 shells. Well, we're only going to do half of a corner here. So we're only going to do 1 shell. So that means I'm going to do 2 more double crochets into the corner space. So from now on, as we continue on, the pattern will kind of shift every second row. So every odd row or round, well, we're working in rows now because we're going to go back and forth. But see, round 1 was the center, round 2 was here. This is round 3. So every odd row will begin with 1 shell in that corner, okay? And then every even row will change. So I've done 1 shell, and now all I'm going to do is I'm going to find my next shell space, which is right there, and I'm just going to work another regular shell. Okay, so now we're going to be expanding the size of our square, but only on 2 sides. Okay, so there you can see we have that chain 3 and the side is staying nice and straight. So we're coming up to this corner here. We're going to work a regular corner. Okay, so you know what that means. Shell, chain 2, and shell. And as always, you want to try and keep everything nice and relaxed. You don't want your work to be bunched and scrunched, I call it. Okay, so now I'm going to chain 2 to create my corner and then go back into that same corner space to create my next shell. And I'm motoring through here because I'm assuming that you guys have had lots of practice with your double crochet. Okay, so I've got 1 side and a corner, and really in the mitered square you're only going to ever work 1 corner now. As I come around the bend, I have another shell space, so I'm just going to work a regular shell. 3 double crochets. And now I have my last corner that I'll work on. But remember, on these 2 ends, we're only ever going to work half of a corner, which is simply just a shell. So now each row, or each odd numbered row, will always be flanked at the beginning and at the end with 1 shell. And that's it. Okay? So now you can see the design hopefully you're going for. So we're only ever going to work these 2 sides. Okay? Now we're at the end. So we're going to chain 3, 1, 2, and 3. And now you're going to turn your work. So this chain 3 for now doesn't really count for anything. All it does is help give us height and creates the straight edge of the side of the square we're looking for, okay? So you're just going to chain 3 and then kind of not worry about it for now. We're just going to go right into the next space and work our usual shell. So that would be 2 more. The other thing about the mitered square, now when you're doing a regular square, you always have the right side of your work facing up because you're working in the round. Now when you're working in rows, we are going to be turning our work back and forth. So see, now these shells are the back side, but now we're creating shells that have the front side facing up. So you're mixing up the fronts and the backs, which actually creates such a cool texture between the front and the back of the work. Okay, so see how we did that chain 3? What that does is it creates the space for when we come back up the next row to do a shell. So remember I said before, every odd row is always going to start and end with a shell. Well, every even row will always start and end with a chain 3 space. Okay, so the rest now should be easy peasy in the sense that you know where to place all your shells and then your corners. Okay, so what you're going to notice is that you're going to have more shells as you work towards your corners, as the square gets a little bit larger. So go ahead and do that, and then I'll just meet you at the end here of row 4. Okay, so just done my last official shell into the shell space. We've got a shell remaining here from the previous row. So remember, this is an even row, so it's row 4. Okay, so 2, 4, 6, 8, 10. All the even rows will begin with a chain 3, or known as a double crochet, and it will end with a double crochet. Now, if you are chaining 1 in between your shells, you would chain 1 first and then double crochet into the top of your stitch. Now this was actually a chain 3 to start. So if you need to, just turn your work here so you can find the top of that chain 3, and we're going to just double crochet into the very top of that. So this is going to create that space that we were talking about. See that? So all the odd rows will begin and end with a shell. All the even rows will begin and end with a double crochet, also known as a chain 3 if you're starting. So at this point, you want to set down your work, and I like to take the 4 corners here and just stretch them out. And that is now really kind of developing. So you can see how the color change is really kind of showing off a neat shape there. And you can see too, because we turned our work, the texture is really, really cool. Okay, so at this point, it would be a good time if you wanted to change colors. And usually people are doing it after every second row, just to give it that nice effect. Now, if you want your color changes to be thicker, instead of doing it every 2 rows, you can do like every 4 rows, for example, and then change colors. You can make them multicolored, like I've seen them done with like 4 colors, 6 colors, or you can just go back and forth with 2 colors. Like in this example, that's exactly what I'm going to do, just to kind of show you how it's working. So I'm going to do the same thing again here. At the end of that even row, I'm just going to snip my yarn, and I'm just going to fasten off. So you'll have a lot of little tails there, and you'll just want to sew those in. Okay. And then I'm going to bring back my pink color, and of course put a slip knot on my hook. And what I want to try and do is I want to try and now always start where I finish. And I'm going to tell you why. Because we are turning our work back and forth, I'd like that texture change to stay consistent. So if I snipped off here and then started again here, then I'd have 2 fronts facing forward. Now, granted, if you want to be super artistic and you're purposely doing that to create that type of texture, go for it. You know, this is the beauty of it. You can kind of create your own vision for these things. But for me, that's what I decided I want to do. So I know I ended here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn my work as if I did not change colors. And so I'm going to slip stitch now, not into the stitch, because remember, we are back at an odd row. So we want to work into the space. So I'm actually going to slip stitch into the space there. And again, that's just helping me keep things nice and consistent. So this now is just going to be a repeat of row 3 and 4. And this, you can build it as big as you like. So I will start with a chain 3. And then I'm going to place 2 more double crochets because we're starting with a shell in this row. This is an odd row. Okay, so there's my shell. Now I move into the next shell space. And we just proceed. So once you get through row 3 and 4 to kind of get the hang of how to start and end, the subsequent rows really do become super easy to follow along. Okay. Yeah, so now you can, this is a much better example than the original one I had worked on. So now you can really see the color change. Okay. So go ahead and finish this row, and I'll just meet you at the chain 3 space just to kind of take you around the bend there. Okay, so yeah, now you can really see how the color changes are growing. Just so cool. Okay, so we've come to our chain space. Remember, if you ever kind of forget, I mean, now that it's established, it's so easy to see. When you have a space, you work a shell into it. When you have a shell, you're going to work a chain 3. The other way to go is go, oh, what did I do at the beginning? Okay, I did a shell at the beginning. Okay, I'm going to do a shell at the end. I know I always come up with these little silly ways to help me remember patterns. But anytime you see a chain space, you will shell into that. Okay. And looks like I'm running out of my little bit there. Okay. Love that. And then you would chain 3. And this is now a repeat of row 4. So chain 3, that creates our space. We ignore it and then go right into the shell space. I love how this this particular way of doing a granny is working out so nicely. It just kind of really brings out the color and the texture so nicely. Now, if you're really into working on module projects and a lot of different motifs, you're going to want to check out our playlist on motifs. So we're always kind of throwing a few different things in there. We have a lot on granny squares and granny motifs, different shapes, different sizes, different ways you can put projects together in modular fashion. So, and if you like that kind of thing, and by the way, if you're not subscribed, you really should press that subscribe button, because then you'll know every time we upload a video, and then you'll be up to date. And you'll be able to know every time we have one of these fantastic motif tutorials uploaded. And which brings me to the point of, if you are liking a lot of these motif type of tutorials, make sure to press that like button and give me a thumbs up. This will help me know that you're liking this type of content, and I'll make sure to do more of these in future as well, okay? And it looks actually like I just ran out of my little bit here, but so I was working the corner here. So I'm gonna leave it there, just because I think now you kind of get the gist. We're just literally repeating row 3 and 4, row 3 and 4. So you can see once I started doing the mitered side, the shell row, the chain row, the shell row, the chain row. That's kind of what I call it. And it's easy peasy. There you have it. And of course, you're going to sew in all your ends. And if you want, many people do this, when you've got the size of your square that you want, you can then go and do a border. Now you can keep it, again, the same color, a completely different color. Maybe your border color is going to be the color that's going to unify all the squares together. Like when I did this solid one, I decided that my border color was going to be white. I've also seen projects where every single border is a different color. And it all depends on how you join your squares together, by the way, because if you have different colors and you're using the whip stitch method, it might kind of affect how the joining will look, which, by the way, if you want to learn an easy join as you go method, we do have a tutorial on how to join your granny squares as you go. We call it the easy join as you go. There's a couple of different methods, but I'll leave a link for that in the description box down below as well. Okay? All right, my darling crochet friends, I hope you've enjoyed this tutorial today on the mitered granny square. And if you have any questions, just pop it down below, or pop me an email directly at info@crochetcrafty.com. And you can always find me on Instagram, which I love when you guys tag me with your work. I love to see how my designs are interpreted by different people. So definitely make sure to reach out to me there. We have a newsletter you can be up to date on. And we always give away a free written pattern in that newsletter every month. And we're also now on Facebook. Holy cow, we're getting all over the place. So you can just find me at the Stitch Sessions on Facebook, okay? And of course, as always, you can check out our website for other tools, tips, and tricks at crochetcrafty.com. All right, guys, this has been a blast. I hope you're having a great time. If you're new to the craft of crochet, it is such an exciting time for you. I'm still excited over it. And I've been doing this for probably over 30 some odd years. So have an amazing time jumping into these projects. Have a wonderful day. Take good care, everyone. And I will see you in the next session.